Life had a way of surprising me. At 58, I never expected the most challenging part of my life would come after retirement. It all started when I took in my grandson, David, to help him escape his chaotic home. Little did I know, I was inviting a storm into my peaceful life, one that would tear through my finances, my heart, and ultimately change everything I thought I knew about family and forgiveness. Stick around to hear the rest of my story, and don't forget to comment where you're watching from. I'm curious to know who's listening. When my husband passed away, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I was wrong. After 30 years of marriage, retirement should have felt like a new chapter, one where I could finally take a breath. But nothing could have prepared me for the arrival of my 22-year-old grandson, David. I hadn't seen him in years, but when he showed up at my door, a suitcase in hand and a look of frustration in his eyes, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. His mother, my daughter, had always had a tempestuous relationship with him, never able to understand his need for independence or his unwillingness to follow rules. I had heard about the fights, the yelling, and the constant chaos, but it wasn't until David left her house that I truly understood how bad things had gotten. "I don't know what else to do, Grandma," David had said as he stood in my doorway. "I just need a place to stay for a while. I'll figure things out." I agreed, of course. What kind of grandmother would I be if I turned him away? I told myself that I was doing this to help him, to give him the stability he desperately needed. But from the moment David moved in, I began to feel like I had made a terrible mistake. He was lazy. He never cleaned up after himself, leaving dirty dishes in the sink, clothes piled on the floor. It was as if the house didn't belong to him. He spent hours in front of the TV or playing video games, and every time I asked him to help out with something, he'd make excuses or brush me off. "Grandma, I'm too tired," he'd say, lying on the couch. My patience started to wear thin. It wasn't just the lack of help, it was his entitlement, his belief that he didn't owe anyone anything. I could tell he didn't appreciate what I was offering him. It made me angry, but I told myself to stay calm. After all, he was family. I tried to give him the space he needed to settle in, but things began to get worse. And it wasn't just the mess. Something else was happening that I couldn't ignore. I remember the first time I checked my bank account. I had logged in to see if I could afford a little treat for myself, a dinner out with friends. What I saw shocked me. There were transactions for things I didn't recognize, online purchases, payments for electronics, and something that caught my eye, a new TV, one of those fancy models that cost a fortune. I couldn't believe it. I knew I hadn't bought anything like that. My heart started to race, and I immediately thought of David, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him yet. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I was just imagining things. The next few days only made things worse. David came home with new sneakers, the most expensive brand I'd ever seen. And then there was the video game console he bragged about. The one I knew was way out of his price range. When I asked him where he was getting all this money, he brushed it off. "I'm doing some online business, Grandma." "You wouldn't understand," he said, eyes glued to the screen of his phone. I wasn't buying it. And that was when the doubts started to creep in. Doubts I could no longer ignore. Something was wrong. The tension in the house grew. I could no longer look the other way. There was no way David could afford all this, especially considering he wasn't working and spent most of his time gaming. It was at that point I decided to start looking more closely at my finances. I checked every transaction, and that's when I saw it. Multiple purchases, thousands of dollars spent on things I never agreed to. It didn't take me long to realize the truth. David was using my credit card. I confronted him that evening. He was lounging on the couch, playing a game as if nothing was wrong. The anger I'd been suppressing finally boiled over. "David," I said, my voice shaking with emotion, "where is all this money coming from?" He looked up, his expression unreadable. "What money, Grandma?" "The money you've been spending on all this crap," I snapped. "This is my money, David. My retirement savings. What the hell do you think you're doing?" He didn't even flinch. Instead, he casually leaned back, his eyes avoiding mine. "You're gonna die soon anyway, Grandma. Why do you need all that money? I'm just having a little fun while I can." I felt my heart shatter. "You think I'm just going to die soon?" The words cut deeper than anything he'd ever said to me before. I wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders and shake him, but instead I stood there frozen. I couldn't believe my own flesh and blood had done this to me. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. How had my own grandson become this person? How had he come to believe he could take advantage of me so easily? But then, I realized something. I was done being the victim. I spent days plotting my revenge. I wasn't going to confront him again. I wasn't going to beg him to leave. Instead, I decided to show him just how much damage he had caused, and I would do it in a way that he'd never forget. I didn't need to act out of rage. I needed to make him feel what it was like to lose control, to lose everything. I was going to take a trip he'd never see coming. It wasn't until a week after my confrontation with David that the weight of everything truly began to sink in. I kept telling myself that I was overreacting, that maybe I was just too sensitive. After all, he was my grandson. And family is supposed to look out for each other, right? But something about his casual dismissal of my hard-earned money, the way he acted like it was nothing, haunted me. It wasn't just the stolen money that bothered me, though. It was the way he shrugged off my hard work, as if all those years of struggling and saving for my future were somehow pointless. I wasn't some rich woman, not by any stretch of the imagination. I'd worked hard my entire life, raising children, paying bills, and making sacrifices so I could live comfortably once I retired. And here was David, treating my retirement fund like it was his personal piggy bank, spending it on meaningless things while I struggled to make ends meet. I began to watch him more closely, noticing his behavior with growing suspicion. His arrogance was growing with every day that passed. It wasn't just his spending habits. He was rude, dismissive, and entitled. The more he threw around his business talk and braggadocio about his newfound wealth, the more I realized just how little he cared for anyone but himself. One afternoon, I caught him coming home with yet another expensive purchase, this time a new gaming laptop. It was the final straw. I had had enough of his lies, his excuses, and his disrespect. He didn't care about anyone or anything except himself and his latest gadgets. I walked over to him, my hands trembling as I tried to keep my composure. "David," I said, my voice tight with barely contained anger, "I want to know the truth. How are you affording all of this? What are you really doing?" He didn't even look up from his screen as he responded, "Grandma, I told you, I'm making money online. I don't have to explain myself to you." I could feel my blood boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me again. "No, David, you've used my money without my permission, and I want to know how you're doing it." He finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing as if he was annoyed by my persistence. "It's none of your business," he muttered, before turning his attention back to his laptop. I felt the anger bubbling up inside me, but I held it in. I had to think. No more yelling, no more losing my temper. I needed to figure out a way to show him just how much he'd hurt me. I spent the next few days doing what I should have done from the start, investigating. I started checking my bank statements, going back months, trying to piece together what had been going on. The more I looked, the worse it got. There were multiple online transactions for things I hadn't bought, gaming equipment, tech gadgets, even a trip to a concert. All of it was under my name, charged to my account, and all of it was clearly his doing. I knew this couldn't go on. My retirement savings were meant for me, for my future, not for David to spend on his whims. I found myself pacing the living room, feeling the weight of the betrayal settle over me like a heavy blanket. The anger I felt now wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, or rather, the complete lack of it. I had given David a place to stay, a roof over his head, and this was how he repaid me? By stealing from me? I couldn't let him get away with it. But what could I do? He was my family after all. I wasn't a vengeful person, but the idea of him walking all over me, taking advantage of my kindness, made me sick. I had to show him that there were consequences for his actions. It was then that the idea hit me. It wasn't something I'd planned to do, but it was the only thing that seemed to make sense. If David was going to treat me like a fool, I would make him feel the pain of losing something he cared about. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to beg, and I wasn't going to let him off easy. I was going to teach him a lesson he'd never forget, but I needed to be smart about it, quiet, calculated. It wasn't going to be about punishment. It was going to be about showing him the real cost of his behavior. I started planning. It wasn't long before I had everything figured out. I would take the one thing he cared about most, his money, and make him understand exactly what it felt like to lose control. I began to plan a trip, my dream vacation, the one thing I had never allowed myself to take before. I would go to a place I'd always dreamed of visiting but had never had the chance to. And I would use David's credit card to pay for it all. Every last cent. I knew this would send him into a tailspin. The thought of him losing control of something he thought was his, just like he'd made me feel with my own money, filled me with a sense of quiet satisfaction. I wasn't going to just spend the money recklessly, though. No, this would be calculated. Every penny would go toward giving me a taste of the life I deserved, without him interfering. He'd made me feel small, insignificant, and taken advantage of. It was time for him to realize what that felt like. The morning I booked the flight, I felt a thrill of satisfaction. This wasn't just a trip, it was my revenge. The power was in my hands now, not his. I knew David would be furious when he found out, but I wasn't going to be around to hear it. I was going to disappear for a while, leave him with nothing but his own mess to clean up. And when I came back, he'd understand just what he had lost. It didn't take long for my plan to come together. But even as I made my arrangements, a part of me still wondered if this was the right thing to do. Was I really ready to take things this far? But then, I'd remember what David had said to me that day, how he casually dismissed my hard work, how he took what wasn't his, and how he mocked me when I confronted him. I was done being the victim. I spent the next few days planning everything meticulously. The tickets were booked, the hotel reservations confirmed. I told myself it was for me. It was about me, for once in my life. I wasn't going to apologize for taking a break from the suffocating weight of everything David had put me through. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a declaration of my independence. But as the days ticked down to my departure, I kept thinking about how David would react when he found out. Would he just ignore it? Pretend it didn't happen? Would he confront me, demanding answers? The uncertainty was unsettling, but I knew I couldn't back out now. I had to go through with it. I had been too passive for too long. I'd never used a credit card in such a reckless way before. It felt like I was stepping into territory I had no experience with, but the thrill of it was undeniable. It was like flipping a switch, a shift in power I hadn't known I needed. David had made me feel powerless, invisible even. Now I was taking back control, even if it meant a little chaos. The day I left, I packed my bags with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I slipped my phone into my pocket and made sure I had everything I needed. My passport, my wallet, and a sense of liberation that felt almost foreign. I was finally doing something for myself, something that wasn't about making dinner, cleaning the house, or worrying about everyone else's needs. The flight was long, but the moment I stepped off that plane, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while: joy. The city was alive with possibilities, beautiful architecture, bustling streets, the thrill of something new. I was free. I could feel my chest lifting with each step. I spent the next few days completely absorbed in my own happiness. I ate at restaurants I'd only ever dreamed of visiting, wandered through art galleries, and treated myself to every indulgence I could imagine. For the first time in forever, I didn't have to worry about anyone but myself. It felt liberating, like a breath I hadn't taken in years. But even in the midst of all this, I couldn't help but think about David. He was back at the house, stewing over what I'd done. I couldn't bring myself to feel bad for him, not when I knew he had been taking advantage of me for so long. The idea of him panicking, realizing what had happened, brought a twisted sense of satisfaction. I thought about what he'd say when he found out. Would he yell? Would he beg me to come back and fix everything? Or would he try to turn it all around, pretending like none of this was his fault? I was almost eager to see how he would react. It wasn't until a few days into my trip that I received the first sign of his rage. My phone buzzed as a message from David popped up, his words dripping with anger and disbelief. "Where the hell are you? I'm getting all these notifications about charges on my card. What the hell did you do?" I almost smiled at his tone. It was exactly what I had expected. Outraged, accusatory, with no sense of responsibility for his own actions. He still didn't get it. I didn't respond right away. There was nothing to say that would change anything, no explanation that could make him understand. Instead, I took a deep breath and went about my day. I was determined to keep my peace, not let him pull me back into his drama. For the next few days, his messages became more desperate, pleading even. "You're crazy, Grandma. I can't believe you did this. I'm going to report you to the police. This is theft." I didn't bother responding. His words were just noise now. It wasn't about the money. It was about him finally learning a lesson. He needed to understand what it felt like to lose something, to feel the sting of consequences. By the time I'd fully indulged in my vacation, I had spent every penny of David's card. But it wasn't about the money. It was about showing him that I wasn't someone he could push around. I wasn't going to sit in the background and let him take advantage of me anymore. This was my chance to finally stand up for myself. When I returned home, I felt a mix of emotions: excitement, relief, and maybe a little guilt. I had done something drastic, but it was necessary. Now I had to face the aftermath. The moment I opened the door to the house, I knew something was off. The silence felt heavier than usual. I hadn't expected things to be in perfect order, but I didn't expect the complete chaos that greeted me. There were empty pizza boxes on the floor, dirty dishes piled high in the sink, and crumbs scattered across the couch. It was like a hurricane had come through while I was away. And David, well, he wasn't there. I checked my phone again, seeing several missed calls from him. He was furious. When I finally heard his voice, the rage was palpable. "You're insane, Grandma. You think you can just disappear, spend my money like it's yours? You've completely lost it. I'm going to call the cops. I'm going to make sure they know exactly what you did." I stood there, phone in hand, trying to keep my composure, but I couldn't help the smirk that tugged at my lips. "David," I said, my voice steady, "you need to calm down. It's just a little trip, just a small way of teaching you a lesson. After all, I'm sure you learned something, didn't you?" As I hung up the phone, I realized just how far things had spiraled. What had started as a simple plan to show David that there were consequences for his actions had now become something much larger. Something I hadn't fully prepared for. I wasn't just dealing with the money, I was dealing with the emotional wreckage of a relationship I didn't know how to fix. But what I did know was this: I wasn't going to back down. David was going to have to face the consequences of his actions, and I wasn't going to apologize for giving him the wake-up call he so desperately needed. The ball was in his court now, and there was no turning back. I had done it. I had taken the trip I dreamed of, used David's money, and in doing so, felt a wave of power and freedom I hadn't experienced in years. But when I returned, the full weight of my actions began to settle on me. I wasn't sure how far I was willing to go in this battle with my own flesh and blood. The thought of what David would do when he found out gnawed at me, but I convinced myself it was worth it. He needed to understand the real consequences of his behavior. What I hadn't anticipated was the sheer rage that would consume him once he realized what had happened. When I walked into the house, the mess was exactly what I'd expected, only worse. Pizza boxes, dirty laundry, wrappers, and cans strewn across the floor. The house was in disarray, but worse than the mess was the silence, an unsettling, oppressive silence that only made the whole thing worse. David wasn't there. I checked the kitchen, checked the living room, but he was nowhere to be found. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or anxious, but I knew that when he found out what I'd done, everything would explode, and explode it did. The first message I received from him was a fury-laden text. "What the hell did you do, Grandma? I'm seeing all these charges on my card. Where the hell are you? What did you spend my money on?" I knew the storm was coming. The part of me that had enjoyed my vacation now felt the sting of anticipation. I didn't even bother responding at first. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react to his tantrum. I had done this for me, and I wasn't about to let him turn the tables on me. Minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. Instead, I let it ring out. It was his voicemail. I figured he'd get the message eventually. An hour later, I received another message. "You're a crazy bitch, Grandma. I'm reporting you. You've stolen from me, and I'll make sure you pay for this." The arrogance in his words nearly sent me into a rage. Who did he think he was? He was the one who had crossed every line first. He was the one who had taken my money, used my credit card, and spent it recklessly. And now he was trying to twist this into something I'd done? I stood there, phone in hand, gripping it tighter with each passing second. The urge to call him back, to put him in his place, was almost too much to bear. But I stopped myself. I knew what I had to do next. Later that evening, when the house was quiet and the reality of my absence settled in, I got another call. This time, I answered. "Martha," his voice crackled through the speaker, thick with anger. "You have no idea what you've done. You think I'm just going to let this slide? You've gone way too far." The words stung, but I held my ground. "I haven't gone far enough, David," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "You think you can walk all over me? You think I'd just stand by while you steal from me? I'm teaching you a lesson, whether you like it or not." He let out a sarcastic laugh. "A lesson? Really? You're the one who needs a lesson, Grandma. You're losing your mind. I'm going to sue you, and then you'll see who's laughing." It hit me. He truly didn't understand what he had done to me. He still thought this was about money, about something trivial, but it wasn't. This was about respect, about setting boundaries and finally standing up for myself after years of being ignored, walked all over, and disrespected. "David," I said, my voice still calm, but firm, "I'm not afraid of your threats. I'm not afraid of your tantrums. You want to sue me? Go ahead. But before you do, you need to ask yourself, how did we get here? Why did I feel the need to do this? What does it say about you that I had to go to these lengths just to get you to understand?" There was silence on the other end for a long moment, the kind of silence that made my heart race. Then he spoke again, his tone quieter, but still sharp. "I don't need your lectures, Grandma. I'm done with you. I'm going to make you regret this. You'll see. I'll have you kicked out of this house. I'll make sure you pay." I could feel the heat rising inside me, the fearlessness that had taken root during my trip growing stronger. "David," I said slowly, "I think it's time for you to leave. This house is mine, and I don't want you here anymore. I don't care if you stay with your mom or find another place. You're not welcome here anymore." His voice exploded on the other end of the line. "What? You think I'm just going to leave? You can't do this. This is my house too." "No," I replied, my voice steady. "It's my house. You've been living here on my kindness, but you've crossed the line. It's time for you to go. Pack your things, David. I'm not asking anymore." The sound of him slamming the door was all the confirmation I needed. He had left, but that didn't mean it was over. In fact, it had only just begun. The following day, he was back. This time he had a threatening letter in hand, one that he had no doubt written himself, claiming that I had stolen from him and that he was planning on taking me to court for what I had done. He even threatened to call the police, but I didn't panic. I wasn't going to let him bully me anymore. I stood my ground, refusing to let him manipulate me into submission. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, looking him straight in the eye as he waved the letter in front of me. "You're the one who has to leave. You're the one who's been taking advantage of me, not the other way around. It's time for you to face the truth, David." But he wasn't ready to face the truth. Not yet. And as much as I had hoped he would, I knew the reality. David still saw himself as the victim in this story. But that was something I was about to change, one final, irreversible step at a time. The battle had only just begun, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to lose this time. I never expected that the moment I stepped onto that plane, the freedom I felt would stay with me for the entire trip. The relief of finally being away from David, from all the mess he'd brought into my life, was intoxicating. I could almost feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as the wheels of the plane left the ground, taking me far away from the chaos I had been living in. It was just me now, in a world where I was in control. The first few days were bliss. I explored the city like a woman half my age, walking down cobbled streets, indulging in delicious food, and losing myself in a world of vibrant colors and endless possibility. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I wasn't the tired grandmother constantly cleaning up after her ungrateful grandson. I was Martha, a woman who was capable of enjoying life on her own terms. I stayed in a beautiful hotel with a view of the ocean, indulging in things I never would have allowed myself before. No guilt, no restrictions, just pure freedom. And every purchase I made, every luxury I experienced, was paid for with David's money. I wasn't spending recklessly. I was living my dream, using the means he'd stolen from me to show him what it felt like to lose control. But even in the midst of the excitement, there was a voice in the back of my mind. What was David doing back home? Had he figured out by now what I had done? What would happen when I returned? Would he confront me? Would he be furious? And most importantly, did he deserve forgiveness? The first message from him came on the second day of my trip. I had been prepared for it, but seeing his name flash on my phone still brought a surge of adrenaline. "Grandma, you can't just do this. You've ruined everything. I don't know what I expected from you, but this is too far. When I get back, you'll regret it. I'm taking this further. Don't think I won't." I let the message sit there for a while, not replying. Part of me wanted to respond, to let him have a piece of my mind, but I knew better than to engage with his threats. He was already showing his true colors: angry, bitter, manipulative, and I had learned from him that silence was often the most powerful response. I turned the phone off and went back to my day, walking through museums, sipping coffee at little sidewalk cafes, and basking in the feeling of being completely removed from everything that had tied me down for so long. By the time I reached the final leg of my trip, I felt like a completely different person, renewed, reborn. My days were no longer dictated by the chaos of David's presence. I had nothing but time to reflect on the choices I had made, the pain I had endured, and the way forward. As much as I loved every moment of the adventure, there was a part of me that knew I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep hiding. I needed to go back, face whatever consequences awaited me, and finish this. But not out of fear. No, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to take the next step in reclaiming my life. I had one more decision to make. Would I let David back into my life, even after everything he had done? After all the lies, the disrespect, and the betrayal? The day I arrived back at the house was unlike any other I had ever experienced. The silence was heavier this time. David was nowhere to be found, and the house was eerily quiet, almost too quiet. I dropped my suitcase on the floor, feeling a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. I pulled out my phone, and sure enough, there was a message from him. I read it in one go, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality in his words. "I'm coming for you." That was all it said. My heart raced as I read it. I knew David had always been reckless, but now it felt like he had crossed a line. He was dangerous. There was no turning back from this. But what did he expect me to do? He thought I was afraid of his threats? I didn't have time to waste. I went through my mail, sat down, and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment everything changed. I wasn't going to back down. David needed to learn. He needed to face reality. I called a lawyer. I needed to make sure I was prepared for anything that came my way. I wasn't the same woman who had let him walk all over her. I had my rights, and if David thought he could intimidate me, he was sorely mistaken. The next few days were a blur of messages from David, each one more desperate than the last. He continued to threaten me, claiming he was going to take legal action, that he'd go to the police, that I would regret this. But each time I saw his messages, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I didn't feel guilty for what I had done. I had taken his money, yes, but it wasn't about the money. It was about respect. It was about teaching him that there were consequences for his actions, and if he couldn't see that, then there was no place for him in my life anymore. Finally, the confrontation came. David showed up, not at the front door, but in the backyard, waiting for me. His face was flushed with anger, his eyes narrowed with hate, but there was something else, too, something deeper, more vulnerable, that I hadn't expected to see. "You think you're the victim, don't you?" he shouted. "You think that just because you're older, you can pull this crap and get away with it? You think I owe you something?" I stared at him, taking in his words. His anger was palpable, but underneath it, there was a hint of fear. He had never been scared of me before, but now, for the first time, it seemed like he realized just how far I had gone, and that, in itself, was a victory. "No, David, you owe me nothing," I said, stepping forward. "But you owe yourself a lesson. I've spent my life taking care of everyone else. Now it's time to take care of me." He didn't know what to say to that. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. It wasn't over yet. I knew there would be more to come. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I had stood up for myself, and no one, not even David, could take that from me. I knew David would eventually come back. I knew the moment I set foot on that plane that I was setting into motion a series of events that couldn't be undone. But nothing could have prepared me for the storm that awaited me when I returned home. The house was just as I left it, untidy, chaotic, but now it felt like there was a heavy cloud in the air. The silence was almost suffocating. The mess didn't bother me nearly as much as the overwhelming feeling of tension that hung over everything. I wasn't just facing a pile of dirty dishes. I was facing the aftermath of everything I had set in motion. I had hoped David would have cooled off. Maybe he'd rethink his actions. Maybe he'd recognize the lesson I was trying to teach him. But as the days went by and the silence continued, I started to feel the weight of anticipation. He wasn't gone for good. He was going to make his presence felt one way or another. The moment I checked my phone, I saw a missed call from him, then another, and another. He'd been trying to get in touch with me. I felt a pit form in my stomach, but I didn't panic. I was ready for whatever he had to throw at me. I called him back. "Grandma, I don't know what the hell you think you're doing." His voice was low, barely contained, and dripping with contempt. "But you're going to regret this. I'm taking everything from you. I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done." There was a coldness in his voice, a tone I hadn't heard before. He sounded like a stranger, like the kid I had raised was nowhere to be found anymore. He was angry, no doubt about that, but there was something more, fear. And I realized then that what I had done wasn't just a wake-up call for him. It had shaken him to his core. "I'm not the one who needs to pay." "David," I said, my voice steady. "It's you. You've spent years taking advantage of me. I gave you a home. I gave you a chance. And this is how you repay me? By taking what isn't yours? By stealing from me?" There was a long pause on the other end, and I could feel his frustration growing. "You don't know what you've done," he muttered. "You've destroyed everything. I trusted you, and you took what didn't belong to you," I replied, calmly but firmly. "What did you expect? I'm not your doormat, David. I'm not going to let you walk all over me anymore." He didn't answer right away, but when he finally spoke, it was with a venomous tone. "This isn't over, Grandma. You'll see. I'm going to make sure you lose everything." The days that followed were filled with messages from David. Each one was more desperate, more enraged than the last. He threatened me with everything he could think of: lawsuits, calling the police, telling everyone I was a criminal. But none of it fazed me. I had finally seen through him. He was just like his mother, always quick to shift the blame, never taking responsibility for his own actions. And I was done. But it wasn't just the threats that scared me, it was what came next. David showed up. I was sitting in the living room, trying to unwind after a long day, when I heard the front door open. It wasn't a casual knock or a phone call. This was different. This was him forcing his way in. Before I even had time to react, I heard him yelling from the hallway. "Martha, you have no idea what you've done!" I stood up quickly, my heart racing as I moved toward the sound of his voice. He was in the living room now, pacing back and forth like a wild animal trapped in a cage. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you?" His voice was rising with each word, his anger spilling over. "You think you've taught me some lesson? You've ruined everything. You've destroyed the only relationship I had left." I stared at him, shocked by the depth of his fury. "I didn't ruin anything, David. You did. You chose to disrespect me, to steal from me, and now you want to blame me for it?" David's face twisted with rage, his fists clenched. "I trusted you," he screamed. "You're the one who's crazy. You don't know what you've lost. I'm going to make sure you never get away with this." The words stung, but I stood my ground. "You're right about one thing. I lost. I lost the son I thought you were. I lost the respect I thought I had earned. But what you don't get is that you're the one who's going to lose in the end. You've already lost me, David." The storm in the room felt suffocating. David was no longer the young man I'd tried to help. He wasn't the grandson I had once adored. He was someone else, someone I didn't even recognize anymore. And I realized then that there was nothing more I could do for him. He had to figure it out on his own, just like I had to figure out how to live my life without constantly putting others first. He stood there, panting, his face flushed with rage, and then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him with a force that rattled the walls. I stood in the living room, breathing heavily. The confrontation, though intense, had brought me a strange sense of relief. The battle had been fought, the lines had been drawn, and now it was over. At least I thought it was. The next day, I received another call from David, but this time it was different. His voice was subdued, quieter. "Grandma," he said, his tone unexpectedly calm, "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make up for everything I've done." I was silent for a moment. His words hung in the air between us, uncertain. "David," I said, my voice soft, "you can't fix everything, but you can start by admitting you were wrong." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I was wrong, Grandma. I've been selfish. I've hurt you, and I don't know how to make it right." His apology, though long overdue, was a step in the right direction. But I knew that it wasn't the end of our journey. There would be more to this story, but for the first time, I felt like I had some control over what came next. The next few days were filled with silence. No more threats, no more messages. I didn't know where David was, but I knew I had done what I needed to do. David had a long road ahead of him, but I had finally found the strength to stop enabling him. I couldn't save him from himself anymore. I had to save me. I woke up the next morning, feeling like I had taken a breath I didn't know I was holding. The events of the past few days had drained me emotionally, but also filled me with a sense of accomplishment. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's choices on my shoulders. I wasn't going to fix David's problems anymore. As much as I had hoped for a peaceful resolution, I knew deep down that this wasn't over. Not yet. David's rage had been palpable, but so had his guilt. He knew he had gone too far. I could feel it in his voice during that brief apology. The vulnerability, the admission of fault, even though he'd been unwilling to fully accept it before. I couldn't help but wonder, had he really learned anything? Or was this just another cycle of empty promises and unkept resolutions? I had spent years hoping he would grow into the man I always wanted him to be, but I had to face the painful truth. He wasn't that man yet. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between us grew heavier. I didn't hear from David. Not a call, not a message. I had to admit to myself that a part of me feared he was gone for good, that my actions had pushed him over the edge beyond repair. I couldn't tell if that thought relieved me or devastated me. But then, late one night, just as I was about to turn in, my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. I froze for a moment before I picked it up. It was a message from David. "I'm at the door. I need to talk to you." I stood still, staring at the screen. What now? I took a deep breath and set the phone down. For a long moment, I thought about ignoring him. I had made my peace with the idea that we might never speak again. But then, I realized I had to face him. Not because he deserved it, but because I needed to face him. It was time to stop running from this. When I opened the door, David was standing there, his face a mix of exhaustion and regret. He was different somehow, less like the arrogant young man who had stormed through my life, and more like a young adult who had seen the consequences of his actions in a new light. "Grandma, I know I've messed up," he said, his voice quiet, almost fragile. "I've been thinking about everything, about the money, the way I've treated you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to be here. But I'm asking for another chance. Please." I didn't know how to respond. I could see it in his eyes, the genuine sorrow, the awareness of how deeply he had hurt me. But a part of me hesitated. I wanted to forgive him. I really did. But the scars he'd left behind weren't so easily healed. "David," I began, my voice soft but firm, "I don't know if I can forgive you yet. You've hurt me in ways I never imagined you could, and you've pushed me to my limit." He nodded, taking a step closer, though he stopped short, as if unsure how much space he should take. I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I've been to rehab. I've started working, really working, to turn things around. I just wanted to show you that I'm trying. I'm really trying." For the first time, I could see the weight of his past decisions in his eyes. He had changed, or at least, he was starting to. "I'm not going to pretend that everything is just going to go back to normal," I said, the words coming out slower, more deliberate. "But I've realized something too. I've spent my life taking care of everyone. I never took care of myself, and now I need to make that a priority." David stood there, silent, giving me the space I needed. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but there was something else there. Hope. It was clear that, despite everything that had happened, he still wanted to be part of my life. He still wanted a chance to prove that he wasn't the person he used to be. "I can't promise you anything, David," I continued, my voice wavering slightly. "I can't promise I'll forget what you did, or that I'll ever fully trust you again. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if we can rebuild what was lost." He nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "That's all I'm asking. I just need you to believe that I'm different now. I'm not the same person who walked out of here before." I studied him for a moment. He wasn't the reckless, arrogant young man who had spent my money without a second thought. There was something in him now, something like regret, something like a desire to make things right. I wasn't sure if that was enough, but it was a start. "All right," I said finally, opening the door wider. "Come in. We'll take it one step at a time." That night, As we sat down together at the kitchen table, I realized something important. This wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't the end of the mistakes, the hurt, or the healing, but it was a step toward something new for both of us. David wasn't the perfect grandson I'd always imagined, and I wasn't the perfect grandmother. But somewhere between the pain and the pride, there was a path forward. Maybe it was long, maybe it would be difficult, but I was willing to walk it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't about forgiving him instantly. It wasn't about pretending everything was okay. But it was about understanding, about recognizing that people could change, even if it took time. David had started his journey of redemption. I was starting mine. And this time, we would do it on our own terms. The following weeks were tense, but not as explosive as I had expected. David had moved back in. Though he spent most of his time out of the house, working hard to keep himself busy, he was trying, really trying, to show me that he was different. He cleaned up after himself without me asking, cooked meals for the both of us, and started saving up his own money rather than relying on mine. The subtle shift in our dynamic was palpable. It wasn't that everything was perfect or even close to it, but there was progress, a small but significant change, and I felt it, deep down. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was carrying him. I wasn't his crutch anymore. David and I had long conversations late at night, the kind of conversations I had avoided having for years. We talked about the past, about his mistakes, about my own regrets, and I realized that, just like him, I had my own issues to work through. For so many years, I had ignored my own needs, my own desires, always putting everyone else first. I had spent my life taking care of my children, my family, my friends, and in the process, I had forgotten what it was like to take care of myself. I had allowed David to take advantage of me because, in a way, I had let him. I wasn't just the victim in this story. I had played a part in the dynamic we had created. I think David's realization of his own shortcomings came in bits and pieces. One evening, after a long shift at work, he sat down next to me at the kitchen table, his hands folded in front of him. He looked at me for a long time, almost like he was studying me. "Grandma," he started, his voice hesitant, "I don't know if you'll ever really understand how sorry I am for what I did. I've thought about it every single day since I left. I was so selfish, so immature. I thought I was invincible. But you were right. I was just running away from everything. And you, well, you were always there, trying to make everything better for everyone else, including me." I met his gaze, feeling a mix of emotions swirl inside me. Sadness for what he had been through, but also a certain pride. This was the David I had hoped to see, the one who finally understood the damage he had caused. He wasn't there yet, but he was trying. "I know, David," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "And I appreciate that, but we both have a long road ahead. It's not just about saying the right words. It's about proving it every day. You've hurt me, and I can't just forget that. I need you to show me that you're willing to work hard to rebuild what we've lost. It's going to take time." His face softened, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes, a hint of the person he could become. "I will," he promised. "I'll prove it to you. I won't let you down again." A few days later, I was sitting on the porch, enjoying a rare moment of peace, when David came outside with a small package in his hand. I looked up at him, curious. "What's this?" I asked, a little surprised by his sudden appearance. "I know it's not much," he said, handing me the package with a shy smile. "But I thought maybe it could be a start, a way to show you I'm trying to make things right." I took the package from him, unwrapping it slowly. Inside, I found a beautiful necklace, delicate and simple, with a small pendant shaped like a heart. It was understated, but it felt meaningful in its simplicity. "David," I started, my voice catching slightly. I wasn't sure what to say. It wasn't the gift that mattered. It was the gesture, the thought behind it. "I know it's not much, but I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking about how I can show you that I'm changing," he said, looking down at his hands. "I'll keep showing up, I promise." I smiled softly, a tear escaping from my eye before I could stop it. "You've already shown me more than you know." The days went by in a quiet rhythm, the kind of peace I hadn't had in years. David continued to work hard, both at his job and at rebuilding his relationship with me. We spent time together in the evenings, sometimes talking about everything and nothing. He helped me around the house, offering to cook dinner or take care of the yard work. We didn't talk much about the past anymore, but I could feel the shift between us, the slow mending of our broken bond. Still, there were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if it would all unravel again. But then I'd remember the apology, the change in him, the small acts of care and respect, and I began to trust again, slowly but surely. A month later, we sat together at the kitchen table having dinner. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful. For the first time in a long while, I felt like family again, like we were starting to rebuild something real. David looked at me, his eyes softer now, and he said, "I know I'm not perfect, Grandma, and I know I have a lot to prove, but I want you to know, I'll never stop trying." I took a deep breath and smiled. "I'm proud of you, David. For the first time in a long time, I'm proud." That evening, as the sun set outside, I realized something important. We had both been broken by our actions, David by his mistakes, and me by my inability to put myself first. But in facing those mistakes, we had both learned that redemption wasn't about perfection. It was about the willingness to change, to show up for the people who matter, and to keep trying. David had started down that path, and so had I. And for the first time, I felt the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. We weren't perfect, but we were trying. And that, for me, was enough. In that moment, I realized something else, something I hadn't fully understood before. My journey wasn't about forgiving David or forgetting the hurt he had caused. It was about letting go of the bitterness, the anger, the years of frustration. I was finally freeing myself from the chains I had put around my own heart. The future wasn't certain, and there were still many challenges ahead, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly living again. And that was the start of our new beginning. It's strange how life works. You spend so many years thinking you know exactly how things will unfold, only to realize that everything changes when you least expect it. When I first let David back into my life, I didn't know if it was a mistake or a new chapter waiting to be written. I had no way of knowing whether the lessons I had tried so hard to impart on him would stick, or whether we were both doomed to keep repeating the same mistakes. But now, weeks after his return, I could finally see the truth. We were both trying, and for the first time, I had hope. That hope wasn't the same as blind faith. It wasn't about expecting everything to be perfect. Nothing would ever be perfect, not after everything we'd been through. But there was something about the quiet way he was proving himself, the way he had shifted from arrogant and dismissive to humbled and thoughtful, that made me believe in the possibility of a new beginning. It wasn't long after David gave me that necklace, the simple yet thoughtful gift that still hung from my neck, that we started to carve out small moments of genuine connection. He was no longer just the angry, entitled young man who barged into my life with his careless attitude. He was starting to show signs of the person I always hoped he could become. I watched him more carefully now, at the way he worked, at how he treated me, at how he apologized, not just in words but through his actions. We didn't talk much about the past anymore. It was clear that we both had enough baggage to fill a lifetime, but every now and then we would take a moment to reflect, to acknowledge that things would never be the same, and that was okay. We were rebuilding, slowly, one day at a time. One quiet afternoon, as we sat in the living room together, David leaned forward, his eyes slightly downcast as if weighing his words. "Grandma, I've been thinking," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I don't think I've ever really told you how much I appreciate what you did for me. All those years, you didn't have to take me in, You didn't have to let me stay when things were falling apart, and I don't think I ever thanked you properly." I sat there, taking in his words, surprised by the sincerity behind them. It wasn't something I was used to hearing from him, especially not before everything had fallen apart. The old David would have never said something like that, not without some form of manipulation, at least. But this was different. This was real. "I did it because you were family," I replied, my voice steady but soft. "Because I thought you needed me. But you're not the same person you were before, David. And I think you're starting to see that too." He nodded slowly, as if contemplating my words. "I am. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm not going to give up on being better, for both of us." And in that moment, I knew. This was the start of something real. Things didn't happen overnight. I wish I could say that after David's apology, everything fell into place. and we were immediately perfect, but we both knew better than to expect that kind of magic. The healing we needed was far from immediate, and we both stumbled along the way. But it didn't matter. We were walking together, and that was a start. I watched David find a job, a real job, something he was proud of, something that gave him responsibility. And I watched him struggle too, as he learned how to budget his money, how to make ends meet on his own, without me picking up the slack. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't carrying his weight. It was an incredible feeling, being free from that burden. I did my part too. I found the strength to let go of the bitterness I had carried around for so long. Forgiving him didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It didn't mean everything was magically okay, but it did mean that I was no longer letting the past poison my every thought. And that felt like a victory in itself. One evening, as we shared dinner together, the conversation turned to something I hadn't expected. David was sitting across from me, his usual humor tempered by the seriousness of the moment. "You know," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "I don't think I ever really understood what it meant to be part of a family until now. I've spent so much of my life running from everything, my mom, my mistakes, and even you. But being here, with you, it's different now." His words struck me in a way I wasn't prepared for. In that quiet moment, I saw him, really saw him, for the first time in a long while. He wasn't the angry, entitled young man I had taken in. He was growing, slowly but surely, and that growth mattered more than anything else. "I don't expect everything to be easy," he continued, looking down at his plate, his fingers tracing the edge of his glass. "But I want to be better, for you, for myself. I'm not perfect, and I don't know if I ever will be, but I'm going to keep trying." Tears welled up in my eyes, though I quickly blinked them away. I had never wanted anything more than this moment of genuine connection. "I believe you, David, and I'm proud of you. But remember, you don't have to do it alone anymore. You have a family now, and that's not something you have to run from." We both sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of his words sinking in. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were both on the same path, walking towards something better. That night, as I sat in my favorite chair, watching the evening sky grow darker, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. When David first arrived at my doorstep, I never imagined it would lead to this peace, this sense of mutual respect. But it had. Slowly, painfully, but steadily, we had both found a way to rebuild our relationship. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, and there would be bumps along the way. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. Maybe things didn't have to be perfect. Maybe it was enough that we were trying, and that we were together. And maybe, just maybe, that was all we really needed. The past would always be part of our story. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew that today, this moment, was what mattered most. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. I had to admit, things were starting to settle. David had been back for months now, and while I wouldn't say everything was perfect, it was better. He was working full-time, paying his own bills, and more often than not, he was the one asking how he could help around the house. The days of being a passive observer in my own life were behind me. But of course, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Even as David tried to prove himself, I had to come to terms with a painful truth. The trust between us wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. No matter how hard he tried, there would always be that lingering shadow of what had happened. I couldn't forget the betrayal, the lies, and the years of him using me as an easy target. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table drinking my tea, David came in, a little out of breath as though he had been rushing to get home from work. "Grandma," he said, his voice quiet, almost uncertain. "Can we talk?" I set my cup down, watching him carefully. There was something different about his demeanor tonight. He didn't have that cocky, I'm in control attitude he used to wear like armor. This time, he seemed vulnerable. "Of course," I said, motioning for him to sit across from me. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, running his hands through his hair before taking a seat. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how I've treated you, about how I've messed up." He paused again, as if he were searching for the right words. "And I just want to tell you that I'm really sorry." I studied him carefully. David wasn't a man of many words, certainly not of meaningful ones. And yet, I could see it in his eyes. Something had changed. There was guilt, but there was also a hint of something else, a recognition of the weight of what he had done. "I know you're trying, David," I said, my voice calm, though there was a twinge of pain still present. "But just saying you're sorry doesn't make everything right. You can't just fix everything with words." "I know," he said quickly, nodding in agreement. "I've been thinking about that. I know I can't just say it and make it go away, but I need you to know that I'm not the same person anymore. I'm not the same person who left. I want to prove that to you every day, not with promises, but with my actions." He didn't say anything else after that. He just looked at me, his eyes full of sincerity. But the thing was, I wasn't sure I was ready to believe him. How could I? How could I just forget everything that had happened between us? He had taken advantage of me, drained me emotionally, and used me like an ATM. The next few days were quiet, too quiet perhaps. David went about his business, and I went about mine. But there was an underlying tension between us, a distance that was hard to ignore. One evening, after dinner, David came into the living room while I was watching TV. He sat down next to me, this time with a little more determination in his posture. "Grandma, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I've been talking to someone, a counselor. I think I need to work through a lot of things, stuff I've been running from for a long time." I looked at him, a little surprised. A counselor? I had never thought David would be the type to seek help, especially not for his emotional problems. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. Maybe he wasn't just saying the right things. Maybe he was finally starting to do the work. "That's a good step," I said, though there was a hesitation in my voice. "But it's going to take time. You can't expect everything to just magically get better. You've got a long road ahead of you." "I know," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I don't expect it to be easy, but I can't keep running from my past. I need to own up to the things I've done, to you, to myself, and I can't do that without help." There it was again, the sincerity in his voice. Could it be real? Could he actually be taking this seriously? I didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of his decisions on my own. The weight was now shared between the two of us, and maybe that was enough for now. Weeks went by, and David continued his work with the counselor. He didn't talk much about it, but I could tell that he was changing. Slowly, but surely. He was less defensive, less quick to blame others, especially me. He seemed to be opening up in ways I hadn't seen before. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, he said something that struck me. "Grandma," he began, his voice steady, "I think I'm ready to start paying back what I owe, not just to you, but to myself. I've been given so many chances, and I've thrown them away. But I think now I can start doing things the right way. I want to make up for the things I've done." I sat there in silence for a moment, letting his words sink in. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, the change in his tone, but still, I wasn't sure I was ready to fully trust him again. Not yet. "I'm glad to hear that, David," I said softly. "But words are one thing. Actions are what matter now." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far we had come. It had been a difficult journey, and I still didn't know where it would take us. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, David could finally start to make things right. The truth was, I had no idea what the future held. But I did know this. He had to prove himself, and so did I. We were both on a journey of change, and whether we were ready or not, the future was waiting for us to take the next step. And for once, I wasn't afraid to take it. As the days passed, the cracks in our relationship began to heal, not through dramatic gestures, but through small actions. David, little by little, showed up for me in ways that mattered, and slowly, I found myself believing in him again. Trust wasn't something that could be restored overnight, but it was something we could build together. We were learning to forgive, not just each other, but ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important lesson of all. It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes life can feel like it's on a straight path for so long, and then in an instant, everything changes. I'd spent years sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others. First my children, and then David. But as time went on, I realized how exhausting that was, how the weight of that responsibility had slowly crushed me. In a way, it was David's mistakes and my own reaction to them that finally broke me free. I'd spent so much of my life thinking that being a good person meant endlessly giving, even when it meant sacrificing my own well-being. But through everything with David, I learned a painful truth. Sometimes you have to stop giving. You can't just pour yourself into someone else and expect them to change. People have to change on their own terms. And, just as importantly, you have to let go of what's holding you back, even if it's family. David had started the hard work of changing, but so had I. The days passed with more quiet understanding between us. David continued his counseling, and I continued to let him prove himself. He no longer asked for money. He didn't demand favors. He had started to find his own footing, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the person I had always hoped he could become. But there were moments, small moments, that would remind me of everything that had come before. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting that we both had to heal in our own time. I couldn't rush forgiveness. I couldn't force trust. One afternoon, David came home from work, looking more worn than usual. I could tell something was bothering him. "Grandma," he said quietly, sitting at the kitchen table, I'm struggling with this whole thing. I want to do better. I want to be better. But there are times when I just feel like I don't deserve to be here. Like I'm not worthy of you." I looked at him, watching the vulnerability spill out. This wasn't the brash, defensive young man who had walked into my life years ago. This was someone who had been humbled by the consequences of his actions and was now fighting to redeem himself. "David," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "it's okay to feel like that. You've been through a lot, but you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep showing up. That's all any of us can do." He nodded, the weight of what I had said settling in. "I know," he whispered, "and I want to. I want to prove that I'm worth the chance you've given me." In that moment, I realized how much we both had left to learn. He had a long road ahead, and so did I. But for the first time in a long time, we were walking those roads together, side by side. The months went by, and things continued to improve, slowly but steadily. There were bumps in the road, yes. I'd be lying if I said everything was smooth. Trust is hard to rebuild. It doesn't happen overnight. But with every passing day, David showed me that he was committed to change. And with every passing day, I started to let go of the anger and resentment that had weighed me down for so long. One evening, as I sat in the living room with David, we were just quietly watching TV. It felt like a normal night, but it was more than that. It was a sign that we had finally found a new rhythm. We didn't have to talk about the past anymore. We were simply existing in this space, together. "You know," David said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I think I understand now. What you meant about taking care of yourself. It's not just about making sure everyone else is okay. It's about being okay yourself first. I didn't get that before. I thought I was supposed to fix everyone around me, but I was never fixing myself." I looked over at him, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. He had never understood that the key to helping others was first being whole yourself. It wasn't something I had fully understood until now, either. "I think I understand it too," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "For a long time, I thought being a good grandmother meant giving everything to you. But I didn't realize I needed to start giving to myself again." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized how much we had both changed. There was still work to be done, and the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we had taken the first steps in the right direction. And that meant something. I had spent so much of my life clinging to the idea of what family should be, always sacrificing, always giving, and never asking for anything in return. But now, I realized that family wasn't about sacrificing yourself for others. It was about being there for each other, about lifting each other up, and about recognizing that sometimes the greatest gift you can give is not your time or money, but your trust and your respect. I had learned to trust myself again, and David had learned to trust me. That in itself was enough. Months later, things continued to improve. David had started to build a future for himself. He was getting back on track with his finances, finding stability in his career, and even making plans for the future. I watched him with a sense of pride, knowing that this wasn't the same person who had walked into my life all those years ago. He was someone different, someone better, and I was different too. I wasn't the same woman who had spent years feeling burdened, frustrated, and disrespected. I had learned to put myself first. I had learned to let go of the past and to forgive, not just David, but myself as well. One afternoon, as I was tending to the garden, David came outside and handed me a small box. I looked at him curiously. unsure what it was. "I've been saving up," he said, his voice low but full of meaning. "I know I can't change everything with one gesture, but I want you to know I appreciate you, everything you've done, everything you've taught me." I opened the box slowly, and inside was a small, elegant bracelet, simple but beautiful. "David," I began, my voice catching in my throat. "This is too much." He smiled gently, his eyes full of sincerity. "It's not too much, Grandma. You've given me more than anyone ever has. I just wanted to show you I'm grateful for everything." I didn't know what to say. I had no words. I had spent so long fighting with him, hating him, wishing he could be someone different. But here, in this small, quiet moment, I realized that the person he had become, the person he was still becoming, was enough. And that was all I had ever needed. And so we moved forward, slowly, but with purpose. The past would always be part of our story, but it didn't define us. We did. And in the end, that was enough. It's been a while now, and I find myself reflecting on everything that has happened, how far David and I have come, how much we've both grown. If someone had told me all those months ago that things would eventually settle into something resembling peace, I wouldn't have believed them. After all, the damage had been done, the betrayal, the anger, the years of frustration. How could I ever imagine that it could turn into something new? But here we are. I'm sitting on the front porch as the sun sets, the warm evening air swirling around me, and I can't help but think about the path we've walked. David and I have come a long way. We no longer talk about the past in the same way. We don't need to anymore. The lessons we've learned aren't just words we say to each other now. They've become the foundation of our lives. We no longer carry around the same resentments, the same bitterness. And while I know there are still moments of doubt, moments when I wonder if this is all just temporary, if one day he'll slip back into old habits, I also know this: he's trying. And so am I. David had been doing well. He kept working at his job, putting in the hours, saving up, and making small steps toward being financially independent. For the first time in a long time, he was responsible, and it wasn't just about money. It was about the small changes, the way he'd go out of his way to help me around the house without me asking, the way he'd sit down and talk to me after dinner, not just about the things that were difficult, but about his hopes, his fears. He was finally, truly, opening up in a way I hadn't seen before. And that wasn't all. There were the little moments, the kind that went unnoticed by the outside world, but meant everything to me. The way he would text me in the middle of the day just to check in and see how I was doing. The way he'd take me out for coffee just because he knew I liked it. These were the things that mattered now. The small, quiet gestures of love and respect. It was on one of those evenings, as we sat together in the living room, that I realized how far we had come. The room was filled with the soft glow of the lamp, the quiet hum of the evening outside. David was flipping through channels, his body relaxed on the couch, while I knitted a sweater, my hands working on autopilot. Then he turned to me, his voice breaking the silence. "Grandma," he said, his tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking about everything, about what you've taught me, about what you've given me. And I don't think I've ever really said this, but thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." I set the knitting aside, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you." It wasn't something he said often. His words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, trying to find the words, but I didn't need to say anything. I just reached out and placed my hand on his. "You've made a lot of mistakes, David," I said softly. "And so have I. But the thing is, we're not the same people we used to be, and that's what matters. You've earned my trust again, but it took time, and it took effort." He smiled, a small, almost grateful smile, and nodded. "I know. I just want you to know that I'm doing my best to be better. I want to be someone you can be proud of." "I already am," I said quietly. "I already am." It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the past came rushing back, when the anger and frustration would bubble up again. But we didn't let it destroy us. We faced those moments together, not as adversaries, but as two people who had learned the hard way what it meant to truly care for one another. A few months ago, we took a walk through the park, something we used to do when he was younger. Back then, we would talk about everything: the future, his dreams, his struggles. Now it was different. It wasn't about his mistakes or my regrets. It was about just being present with each other, appreciating the quiet moments that life offered. We didn't need to say anything, but the bond between us was stronger than ever. As we walked, I looked at him, really looked at him, and I could see it, the hope in his eyes, the man he was becoming. Not the man I thought I would lose forever, but the man who had come back from the brink. I felt proud, not because he had become perfect, he wasn't, but because he had become someone who owned his actions, who was willing to fight for what mattered. "Do you think I'll ever be able to make up for everything I've done?" he asked, his voice soft. "You already have, David," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "Every day you show up, you're making it up, and that's enough." It's funny how life works. You go through so much pain, so much heartache, and in the end, you realize that all that really matters is that you keep going. You learn from your mistakes, you show up, you try, and that's what makes all the difference. David still has a long road ahead. I know that, but so do I. We're both still learning, still changing, but what I've learned over the past year is this: redemption isn't about perfection. It's about the willingness to grow. And I can see now that David has that. He has the will to keep going, to keep growing, and that's more than I ever expected from him. And me? Well, I've learned that I don't have to carry all the weight. I don't have to sacrifice myself for anyone. Not anymore. I've learned to take care of myself, to put myself first for once. And in doing that, I've realized that we can be a family again. Not the way it used to be, but in a way that works for both of us. As I sit here, watching the sun set over the horizon, I realize that this moment, this peace, is what I fought for. Not just for David, but for myself. And maybe, just maybe, we're both finally learning how to live. And that's enough. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm ready for it. I'm ready to face whatever comes next, knowing that the path we've walked together is the one that's led us here. And that, for once, is all that matters. The rest can wait. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.